Hey, I'm Michael Arstead. I'm the designer for both Storybook and Chromatic, and I'm also a really mediocre engineer for both as well. So I have a little bit of crossover there, but been a big advocate for accessibility for a long time. Before Storybook and Chromatic, I was working on WordPress.com and WordPress.org stuff, building WordPress core, and obviously accessibility is a pretty critical part of that stuff too. So that stuff has been top of mind for me for the last over a decade now, and I'm excited to talk shop with some other folks. So Melanie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Melanie Sumner. I am a staff engineer and product accessibility lead at HashiCorp, which is now an IBM company. I am on the WAI ARIA working group and co-editor of the accessible name and description computation specification. Try saying that 5 times fast. I live in downtown Chicago with my husband and son and two very large Maine Coon cats. And I'm excited to be here today.
Eric, you're up.
All right. Hey, y'all. I'm Eric. I'm a senior accessibility designer at GitHub. I work on the platform as well as Primer, their design system. I am a white man with short black hair and clear plastic glasses, and I'm really stoked to be here today. Thanks for including me.
Stoked to have you. And Varun, I'd love you to do a quick intro as well.
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Varun. I'm part of the developer experience team at Chromatic here, mostly working on Chromatic documentation. Got complaints about it, reach out to me. But with that, I'm going to hand it back to Michael and let you kick off.
Yeah, so something that has been top of mind for us lately, well, not lately, top of mind for probably the last 20 years for a lot of folks is how do we make our stuff accessible, and how do we do it without, giving up or burning out, or feeling like you're always walking uphill every day or stuff like that, right? Like I think that's a really good core topic. And for us right now, especially at Chromatic, we just launched a couple tools that I designed that are like really close to me. Like I've been really wanting these for a long time, where you can do some accessibility regression testing and you can test across your storybook if you've got storybook or any of that stuff. And I don't want to go too deep on that specifically, because while they're helpful, now that we've got these tools, we're starting to fix all of the things that are broken in terms of accessibility. And these tools are helping us do that, and we're fixing the tools along the way as well. So it's super top of mind right now. Like, hey, we're a small company, like, so we're still like asking these questions for ourselves, but like, where do we start, right? Like that's the big question. Like, how do we start improving the accessibility of an existing project with legacy code, and we don't have a clear picture of what to do or the process or what our state is? So I'm just going to start there, and either of you can jump in.
Oh, see, I think you have to pick. We're both too polite and too much friends. Yeah.
See, we're too polite.
Yeah, we're too friends. I'll go ahead and start. Okay. So I started at HashiCorp about 4 years ago, and I was asked to join as the accessibility specialist for the new design systems team. Some of you may have heard of it now, Helios, because it's accessible, and I talk about it a lot and I post about it online a lot. So you might have already been inundated with information about it. But one of the first things that we did, and this is the first thing you have to do, I think, is you have to get a baseline. In order to determine where you want to go and how you're going to get there, you need to figure out where you are. So doing an audit, we started auditing the products in a casual way with a designer and an accessibility engineer, and just sort of made a list of the things that we thought these would be the most valuable to fix first. And that process led to our roadmap, that led to, hey, big corporation wants to use your products, but they found 36 different types of accessibility issues. And we were able to show that 33 of our design system components would resolve these 36 types of issues. And that's all because we went first and figured out where we were and what we thought in our experience would be the most beneficial things to do first. So that's what I think. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I think a very kind of similar, like tactical approach. I think for handling kind of the overwhelmies of like everything needs to be perfect all at once, there is an accessibility practitioner in the industry called Merrill Evans who has a phrase of progress over perfection. And Melanie, I see you smiling because you know. But basically the idea is like every little bit that you do to improve things compounds and helps. And I think as designers and engineers, like we're very much brought up in a background of like it needs to be perfect when you ship it for whatever definition of perfect is. But digital experiences are dynamic. They can, you know, one of the best things about them is they can be updated as you go. So to Melanie's point, taking a really strategic look at where effort and impact tend to be best allocated, and that usually is within the design system. At GitHub, we have a lot of internal reporting, and like I can show you charts where like literally issues just drop on a cliff because we do, you know, we'll push out an update to a component and then, you know, 57 templates or what have you are suddenly fixed. And it's a really convincing story also for shareholders where it's like, well, if you're thinking about design system adoption, here's a really compelling factor.
Yes. That, I mean, how do, like, going back to that, how do you, so you need a baseline, right? Like, I think it's really important to get a baseline so that you get a sense of the scope of what could be improved, right? Like, what are all the things that we're not doing perfect, like great. And you also get a sense of some priority once you have that baseline. So for example, if you're using any sort of axe tool, you get a priority associated with that. And that's pretty good, at least for like the low hanging fruit, right? Like that's a great way to test various pages on your site. If you've got a storybook, the accessibility add-ons basically doing that exact thing for you. And you can get a good sense of a baseline. And before we did that, before we had storybook tests, like this feature where you can test across all your stories, I basically had to like write some scripts and sort of like figure things out because testing like page to page manually felt pretty hard, slow, and tedious. And yeah, I got some sense, but it wasn't really clear, and it was also really hard to measure for me. And there's a lot of tools out there that do this kind of stuff, but I was in a lucky position where we have a storybook and we were planning to build these features. So I was able to eventually get a baseline. So I was guessing during my design phase for this accessibility dashboard, like guessing at numbers to see like, oh, it's going to be like in the thousands, LOL. You know, like we have a lot of stories. We've got about 2,000 stories on our chromatic application storybook, which is a lot. And as soon as we got reliable tests in, uh, test results in, it was like 21,000, like right off the bat, 21,000 violations. And yeah, like you're saying, Eric, once we looked at that, we were like, okay, well, let's fix our color contrast. You know, that dropped us 3,000 to 4,000 right there. Like it's like a cliff on a single, you know, page, like single set of changes, right? And then I started going after the link component next because there was some like missing name violations and all this stuff. And when I redid that, um, still in review right now, but without even realizing it, that dropped off another 2,000. So you're like slicing things away, and that we wouldn't be able to really see the progress we're making, or B, understand the scope of what needs to be done if we don't have a baseline. And yeah, the Axe stuff is just like a small percentage of what you need to cover, but that baseline was huge for us to get started.
Yeah, and for folks who are not aware, Axe is a automated code scanning tool
Yes.
that is put out by DQ Systems. We use it internally a ton, and it's really good for catching things that basically you shouldn't have to throw a human at. That can kind of be automatically caught. I did, if you'll permit me, I
Yeah.
did want to address something Sylvia mentioned in the chat, which is the audit first approach. Um, and like I have a zesty opinion here, and it's like it's prior to prioritization all the way down. So like auditing has a place and a time. The kind of the one of the issues to contend with is it's a photograph of a website,
Yes.
and websites update all the time. So like one of the things you want to be clever about is making sure that you can take action on that snapshot while it's still relatively fresh. Because one thing that you'll kind of find with a waterfall style like audit and then remediate approach is that by the time you start picking up tickets, the entire experience has changed and it's a moot point. So like one thing that I like to do is think in terms of flows. So like what brings you the money? Like what are the most trafficked experiences? And then like what issues are present there? And like the same way acts as a prioritization. So like what is a hard stop barrier versus what is like annoying but technically navigable around, and like starting to think tactically that way I think is really helpful.
I agree.
And once you start doing that, what we've adopted are in the process of adopting, right? So when you do an accessibility conformance report using the VPAT template, I think actually using the VPAT, it already is a template. And anyway, you have that, and then you're able to list in that report what workflows are important to you. Only I found that by time I had tested those workflows and filled out that report and published it, uh, design had kind of moved away from that being important workflows. So right now I'm working on a project called Project Align, and we're doing design had kind of already identified this as an issue and started working on critical user journeys. And I'm working with them to refine them in a more kind of let's bridge this into some engineering, because I'm really big into accessibility automation. That's really where I think accessibility is a technical issue with a technical solution. And that's where I'm going. That's my focus. So I'm kind of taking these critical user journeys, massaging them a bit so they're able to be used for accessibility testing. And then they're also able to be used for reliability testing. So making sure all of those critical user journeys that have been identified are stable, are tested for accessibility, and are well designed, and like there's a designer responsible for that. And kind of doing that work horizontally across the company has been time consuming, but the payoff's going to be enormous because we're all going to have the same words and the same language to talk about the same things. And I think that's the part where you really start to move away from let's put out fires and into let's be proactive.
Yeah, so to build off of that a little bit, and completely agree, like contemporary design and development is very compartmentalized, and that's neither a good nor a bad thing. It just is the way it is. Whereas like a lot of accessibility work is holistic and lateral. So like it's design, it's development, it's taking a look at like flows as opposed to features. And there can be a lot of potential like awkwardness that comes with that, because you have a tendency to drop into people's business. And so like another thing, if we're talking about burnout and sustainability, is acknowledging that in the way that you work in that way, and like building consensus, building good relationships, is really, really, really helpful, especially when you kind of consider the optics of it, of like, here's a person I don't know dropping in out of the blue to tell me I'm bad and I should feel bad. That's not a good way to like create a sustainable practice. So like leading with curiosity, leading with a sense of kind of like we can work on this together, kind of taking the time sometimes to explain why this is the way that it is. Because like your average person wants to do the right thing. It's just a function of kind of the industry that accessibility hasn't really been a priority until lately. And that's one of those things where it's like you can't really harp somebody about that because they have their own interests and objectives and goals and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
figuring that out is also been pretty helpful.
One thing that you can do to, in the whole, let's address the elephant in the room, like it makes people feel bad sometimes. I like to ask questions. How would a user who only can use a keyboard, how would they navigate this flow? How would someone who is blue-green colorblind be able to determine which of these elements are interactive? And that's when maybe they want to remove the underline to a link or something inadvisable like that. And if I am coming across as curious, I'm giving them the chance to surprise me. I'm giving them the opportunity to say, oh, I thought about this and here's my idea. And then we can have a discussion and then we build relationship. But if I am, oh no, you can't do that because it violates WCAG, blah, blah, blah. I'm the mom. And I am a mother, but I only want to parent my child, not everybody else, right? So I want to build relationships and partnerships with other people, my colleagues. And this is how I do it. I ask questions. I ask curious questions. And then I would love to work with you. Let's pair sometime. My schedule's up to date, drop something on my calendar and let's work on this together. Because really what it is I'm there as a support, as a partner, as a guide, not anybody's mother. So
Yeah. The other and like Melanie's questions, 100% love it. Do it myself. The other thing that is kind of brought up there is the big uncomfy that you kind of also have to deal with is typically the majority of access issues start in the design layer. But usually the onus is historically on development to address that. And so like again, speaking in terms of like impact and effort and burnout, like forging relationships with design is a really good way to like net lessen the impact down the line. Because like the story we want to avoid is everybody signs off on a feature, design's like cool, love it, engineering is like built it, passes all the quality checks, and then we go to like audit it before release and it's just chock full of problems. That's a really terrible situation for everybody involved. So one of the things one of my coworkers did, Matt Obi, he actually cataloged some of the issues that we've had and then broke it down by type and then mapped it to design. And that's not a condemnation of the designers. That's more of an opportunity. So like we took that information and like figured out how can we create training, how can we create resources. And one cool thing about like being an accessibility designer is like I'm part of the design org. So like I'm right there with them and like I can pop into the meetings, like we offer resources, I'm perpetually online. So like creep into my DMs. I'll answer your question. It's cool. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say that's a great way to do it. Like I've talked to a lot of folks at larger scale companies specifically, because that's where I'm the least experienced. And they do a lot of emphasis on training and, following up on curiosity. Yes, they have processes in place to reduce the likelihood someone will accidentally introduce a regression or things like that. But they also have these trainings, like I think it was Atlassian. We're talking to somebody from Atlassian, and they were saying they have sort of like a score per team on how they're doing, for accessibility. And part of that score is just like training, like just make sure the folks are like kind of keeping up to date and have some sense of like what to look for and what not to do. And I think that's a great maybe not this, I don't know about the score specifically, but the training itself is a great way to make it less of this gray area where you're not sure if you want to venture into because it's deep and scary or whatever, you know?
You know, one of the things we've done with our design system components is in the documentation for each component, we have an accessibility tab. So we have the guides for design, and it does have some of the accessibility in there. And then over in the code tab, you see code samples and the API. And then we have an accessibility tab where we'll tell you what the accessibility pitfalls, gotchas, be concerned about are. Because as you're transitioning from a legacy design system to a new design system, or from legacy code to a design system, period, we kind of had to do the let's give you something new that but also feels kind of familiar. And that meant we had to have some temporary stuff in there, API that you could flip on. But in doing so, we would tell you, you will fail an accessibility audit if you use it in this way. We recommend using it in this way. And even in our accessibility documentation, we've listed the WCAG success criteria that this component intends to meet. So we're showing the how to use it, we're showing the potential gotchas, and we're showing the here's how you can go look at that documentation yourself if you don't believe us. Because sometimes I run into designers or engineers who are like, I don't believe you that that's a rule. um, so by giving them the docs, they can go look at it themselves and they can dig into that and then they can learn more and it's easier for them next time. Or at least I'd like to think so.
Yes, there's definitely like so on Storybook, thank you for MDX support. We have tiers of documentation. So there is kind of the component landing page, which has, you know, your do's and your don'ts and like the API for how to use it. And then for the more sophisticated components I've worked on, there is deep dive accessibility component documentation. And the reason for this is exactly what Melanie was getting at, which is like, it's one of those things where it's like, we have to acknowledge that people usually don't proactively read documentation, but in the context of burnout as an accessibility practitioner, one of the things I get a lot of value of is like soup to nuts explaining the component, how it's built from the ground up with a mind to semantics, and basically having the capability to deep link via like heading or, you know, Chrome's little highlight text and copy a URL fragment. So when an engineer has a question of like, why is this the way that it is? It's not you just being kind of grumpy and going, well, it's because I said so. It's like, if you really want to know, like, there is an intentionality behind this and there's reasoning, and I will, you know, I'll break it down for you if you are curious about it. And again, it's bringing people to kind of where you are as opposed to like shutting them down in the moment.
All right, I want to get into some questions real quick. One, somebody, Ryan Williams, you asked, hey, have you found a way to integrate accessibility review into GitHub PRs, given its limited approver workflows? We don't want accessibility approval to merge the PR. Yeah, so I can't speak for everybody, but I have seen multiple ways you can do this. One, you could do it on your own with CI, like running Axe tests or on Playwright or something like that. Storybook has UI tests now, so you can include it in that. But what the feature that I was sort of alluding to earlier is that in Chromatic, we built this accessibility regression testing. So it specifically only yells at you if there are new accessibility violations. And they'll show up if you have new stories and stuff too, like that. But the idea is that you want to keep making forward progress, not backward. And it's not super helpful when you're going to, like, let's say I want to make a new story on a page. It's not helpful if, you know, I'm not allowed to merge because there's 30 violations that are well beyond the scope of the PR that I'm trying to merge, right? Like that's really hard on folks. And so this regression testing, why don't I just share? Like, is that I'll try sharing my yeah, sure. See my browser okay? Should see not what I was going to look at, but we're going to see some meta stuff. We're looking at a pull request I made where I updated a link, and this is a really old build on that, but you can see in it, there's these red highlights now on it where I can see like, okay, this button has nested interactive controls. All over the place. We're seeing some stuff like that, button names missing. Like it's giving me that list, but also if I'm having trouble seeing that stuff, I can just go click on the accessibility panel and see those things. And this is something that specifically UI tests can be set that if somebody hasn't approved all of this, then your PR is not going to merge, right? Like that's how we have it set up, and a lot of folks tend to have it set up. So like this is the idea is that the engineer is getting this to a place they expect like all these changes to be made, right? Like I'm okay with this. This is beyond the scope of what I was working on because this actually isn't a link, it's a button, and I don't want to blow this giant PR already even bigger. But this allows me to keep moving forward. So I know all my link stuff is pretty much taken care of at this point. And just to show you some visuals that I was actually a little surprised at, on this branch with our dashboard, this is our accessibility dashboard. You can see progress over time on specific branches, and also like all the stories that are failing and how many are failing in a component. And we have a lot of tests, so those things kind of add up, right? But on this one, I've gone down like 2,000 over what's on main right now, which has been pretty awesome, right? Like just fixing one atomic component and you get that cliff drop. So when we get that merged in, main is going to drop significantly. But does that answer your question on sort of how to maybe incorporate a review into it? Or are you looking for like an accessibility person to have to review it? And we're all accessibility people. I don't know. Eric will come and review it for you every PR.
Yeah, that's sustainable.
And healthy, and you won't burn out.
Yeah. There's it's a really good question, and like there's definitely tooling, and like I think automation is really good for taking the individual out and creating a like neutral kind of like, well, this is a problem, and you would fix it the same way you would fix like a security violation, the same way you would fix like a programmatically detectable kind of like bug in the logic. There's also the cultural aspect, which is like when you get to the engineering layer, um, trying to foster a culture where if there is an accessibility violation, it is a code quality concern. So like that takes a lot of kind of groundwork to get set up. But one of the things I actually really enjoy at GitHub is that our maturity is at a place now where like I see engineers that are not related to accessibility at all commenting on PRs and saying like, oh, hey, like we should fix this and that. And like that brings me a lot of joy because we've normalized the practice to that degree. So, to your comment on like blocking PRs, um, you know, there's a certain way of looking at it where it's like, yeah, you don't want to be the enemy of progress, but also like if you can kind of create a culture where it's like something to be pointed out as like objectively something that needs attention, that's pretty cool too, because then people are, doing your work for you. Like ideally, I put myself out of business.
Yes, that's definitely my goal. One of the ways I'm doing that is we have a product lifecycle process, and all of our products have to now go through these stages where, okay, you have a feature idea, you have to scope out the feature. Accessibility gets a review there, and we get to look at the feature idea and say this is what you'd want to look out for, basically. And then it goes to design, and design, as they're working through those initial prototypes, accessibility gets a visit there and says, hey, these things are what you might want to look out for when you're doing it. And same with engineering. And before release, we get to look at it one more time just to make sure we followed up. Now, you might think, oh, it's a lot, but guess what? Security does this too. So in making accessibility an equivalent priority to security, to privacy, to integrity, to everything else that we do, we have a technically superior product. It's more stable. We all know what we're doing more quickly. And we're not just rushing something to get out before our next company conference where we want to show off all the shiny new features. We're moving beyond that into being mindful with our thoughts and our actions.
Yeah, I have another zesty take there too, which is without executive buy-in for accessibility, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And we're lucky to have that. And I think like if again we're talking in terms of burnout and sustainability, like before you even get to auditing, if you do not have buy-in from folks who are the ultimate decision makers, that is probably where you should be targeting your efforts. And then to Melanie's point, there's different motivational strategies for different kinds of people. You can make an appeal to quality, you can make an appeal to liability, you can make an appeal to like, do you want to do business in the EU? You
Commercial
know,
differentiation is important.
yeah.
Yeah. I just want to loop back to something you said where it's really hard to make progress without buy-in, right? Like how do you justify spending time and effort for both you and your team on accessibility, right? Like that's a hard question. And actually the EU law has been, love it or hate it, a way for folks to say, hey, we're going to lose money or be open to lawsuits if we don't comply. Let's spend money on fixing that, right? Like that is one way. There's other ways to get buy-in, but I just want to make the point that if you've got a good baseline, right? Like you've done in that baseline step, you can show your progress. You can also start tying things to business needs like, hey, if people can't get to our, I don't know, our checkout page, right? Because they're using a keyboard, we're not going to make money. This is how many people are dropping off. Like you can start to make cases that help make a business case for improving things. But I agree that it's really hard to just go like, let's fix accessibility this next year, right? Like that's hard. It's ambiguous. So I think ways you can do that, right? Have clear set of goals. Like, okay, for our first round, we did an audit. Next, we looked at that audit and realized that color contrast, links, and buttons are big offenders right now, which is us right now. This is literal me trying to fix these things. And if we do that, we resolve those. That's like on our storybook, that's like 10, I think feel like it's like 15,000 violations go away right there, right? That's pretty easy to justify. But accessibility is always like a work toward progress. So like having clear specific goals, time scope things, that'll help you get buy-in from the folks above you. And it's really hard when you're a small team. Like I'm the designer at Chromatic. the
Yeah.
so and yeah, we have some really cool other folks that are really good design sensibilities, like Varun definitely does cool design stuff. But how do you get buy-in? It's really difficult when you're a small company. So what you're referring to earlier, Melanie, like got me thinking about what's right for the scale of where you're at in your company size, right? Like, yes, you can implement checks and there's some things you can do at a smaller size that don't require a huge effort and start making progress. I also think at smaller companies, you maybe have a little more leeway in just like fixing things. But as you scale, you need to say like, okay, we have 10,000 employees. How do we do this? And that's where you get those built-in processes, you get those trainings, you have CI checks and all sorts of these really cool tools, because you've got teams and business reasons to do that. And keep that in mind when you're looking at other folks, right? Like if you're saying like, okay, I want to do what, Atlassian's doing with all their cool stuff, but I'm like a 10-person company, maybe that's not like the goal. Maybe like just scale down a little bit and start a little smaller. And that's kind of been my approach so far to
Yeah,
avoid burning out.
I want to also address a comment Bria had in the chat, which is suggestions
Yeah.
for executive buy-in. So like we've been talking in terms of like very kind of cold and mercenary like terms for decision makers. And like sometimes that's true. But again, like these are people. And like the human factor can also be a motivating factor. We had an experience where we were able to kind of bring in a GitHub user and work through a feature that was inaccessible during a design offsite. And the simple act of like showing a person trying to accomplish a job like took it out of the abstract and grounded it in the reality of like why we do what we do. And like we now have an ally pretty high up in the design org who like gets it. And it was from that one moment. And so like sometimes that can be the motivating factor as well. And like, again, I'm going to keep bringing back to burnout. It's like, unfortunately, it is your job as an accessibility professional, I feel, to like figure out what motivates people and then kind of adjust your tack based off of like what they respond to.
Yeah. Um, I have a great deal of emotional fortitude. And I don't say that to praise myself. I say that to say it's something I've purposely cultivated in order to be able to do this work. The empathy that I feel for users with disabilities or users who have a different kind of relationship with technology, that is my internal driver. And yeah, there's still days when I have to go home and I'll have a drink and a cry because a product owner somewhere said, well, why do we have to care about blind people or something? That uninformed and ignorant and frustrating. But when I'm at work, I'm trying to be successful at work. So I look at what are the people who are successful at work doing to get what they need, to get what they want, to accomplish their goals. They don't talk about feelings ever. So I stopped doing that. I decided I want this to be successful. These successful people seem to be doing this. I'm going to try this. And I see it as my job to filter the emotions and the no, really, we are doing this for people. It's not about money or lawsuits or anything else. This is about people at the heart and soul of what we're doing. But at work, I have KPIs. At work, I have North Star goals. At work, we want to expand our business into the EU. We want to acquire more government contracts. Great. I'm a part of helping you do that. Let's be partners. Let's collaborate. And to do that, I just started writing everything down. We use Confluence, Jira, whatever, and it just started writing. Here's how you file a Jira ticket for accessibility. Here's how you label it correctly, and here's the dashboard where they're all being tracked. And here's the report that I send out every month that says, "Oh, look, here's the people who are really helping and fixing their issues, and here's an area where we've actually increased in issues." And by using the tools of the company, the tools of the business, the KPI, the Jira tickets, the reporting, it's getting done because it doesn't often occur to people in business to not do the things as they come across. So, oh, hey, we have this KPI to fix our critical accessibility issues by Q4. They're going to work to meet those KPIs. So I say, like, look at the tools internally, look at the processes internally, who's being successful at the company, what does the company want, and how can you strategically align your goals of accessibility improvements with the goals of the company. And that's how I've managed to be successful at work in a work environment. So I hope that helps.
It also like it sucks, and I hate it, but like it's not enough to do the work. You also have to sell the work. Um, and I keep running into this problem over and over again, but like if you are not involved in accessibility and you look at it from the outside, a really large majority of what we do is invisible. So like, and then also like, usually if I do something well, numbers go down. And in a business context, numbers should go up. So figuring out how, to Melanie's point, like how to tell that story, how to not only deliver value, but quantify the value that you deliver. And I'm still working on that. Like it's a big problem. But like through the lens of burnout again, like remembering that you need to not only do the work, but also sell the work is helpful for setting in, your own expectations as well as expectations around you for like how much effort something's going to take. And then also like that's going to translate to like things like funding and like internal perception. And like we got to acknowledge like politics. So it's like, to Melanie's point, tying it to business value, but also like having a clear cut case of like what you did, what it improved, and why.
Yes. And I think that goes for just about everything you want to do in your company. But I actually think this would be a really good. Do you have any resources for specifically like how do I sell accessibility, right? Like what are the tools I can use to get buy-in to do certain projects to fix accessibility? Like is it like are there do you have any resources out there? Should we make some?
We should probably make some accessibility
Yeah.
specific ones, but
Yeah.
what I would say is don't go for accessibility specific ones.
Yeah.
Going back to my previous point, like, no, we want to equate accessibility with security, with privacy, with all the
Yes.
other quality things that we do on a regular basis. And, one of the arguments you can make is manual testing takes a really long time. Why don't we put this in our CI and have our CI just tell us when something's not right? Then the stuff that we have to test is a much shorter list, is a manual checklist, and that's much easier, or it's still tedious, but it's a lot less tedious than all the things, right? So that's sometimes you have to let stuff like really break and really just say, this is big and overwhelming. Let's strategically work together to improve our process. So the problem is big. Let people feel the weight of the bigness of the problem. And then say, here's some strategic ways that we can improve our process and make this more manageable. And then you have a little bit of momentum. And it's really just finding that first way in, whatever that is, finding that executive that understands it and gets it, finding that designer that's like, no, I get what you're saying. Advocating for hiring folks who already know this kind of stuff and kind of integrate it into the way they work. And really just emphasizing, I'm not here to make you feel bad about this. I'm here to be your partner. These are not my rules. I am just like not a shepherd, but like, your friendly robot saying, hey, you're doing this thing wrong. And over time, that passion, patience, and persistence, that progress over perfection, driving home with your own company. We are not here to get this perfect. We are here to make progress. We are here to iteratively make progress to deliver better value to our customers. We are here to streamline our processes for greater business efficiency. And none of that really talks about the people involved, or that is for people. But we're saying things in a way that the people signing the checks understand and therefore want to keep signing our checks, which, kind of helps.
I don't have any other notes I think that's awesome. Print that out, frame it, put on your wall. I want to take the next 14 minutes and start going through some questions. So if you have more questions, please add them in here. So let's see here. Do you have any suggestions for documenting accessibility behavior before development begins? I think we covered that a little bit. Like the examples, like I think Primer and many other component libraries have some good like accessibility sections and things like that. So folks implementing it will get a sense of what they should and shouldn't do. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, one thing we're bullish on internally is accessibility annotation kits for Figma as well. So to be continued in terms of offerings. Hint, hint.
Okay. Okay.
But basically removing ambiguity for the designer to developer handoff with regards to accessibility. And our kit is the annotation kit. It's not the accessibility annotation kit. So it's just like, these are baseline concerns. And so like, here is my intentionally expressed like qualities. So, here you go, developer. This is how it should look, but also this is how it should behave.
Yeah, one of our designers has also developed an internal UI annotation kit for our Figma. And that's being very well received and very well used. And we just sort of swings and roundabouts. Sometimes folks get busy and they forget that it's there and they forget that it's a tool for them, right? So there's a figuring out of that cadence. How often do you need to remind people? How often do you need to say, hey, remember you have these tools here. They're super awesome. We'd love to help you use them even better. Let us know if we can consult. Or just going in and leaving a comment. Have you considered using the UI annotation kit here? And that really has garnered some positive results.
All right, let's go to that second question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any tips on organizing documentation in Storybook? For example, you might have some stories that are accessibility approved, but some that are work in progress. Keep an eye out. We have some stuff cooking around Storybook organization that will probably be in the next few weeks. But to answer your question immediately, one of the tools I might use for this would be tags. So you can add tags to specific stories in Storybook. And those tags even include some accessibility tags. I would go like look that up real quick, but you could use those to denote what is or isn't accessible. You could even use them to skip certain stories if you know they're like rough and a work in progress. You could say like, hey, please don't run accessibility tests on this because we don't want to break CI every time someone like tries to work on that. So you can do stuff like that. As for organization, that's like a bigger topic that I don't want to go too deep on right now. Is there you want to add anything to that?
A quick one, like it's a human problem that looks like a technical problem. So like create rituals around like combing through and like because people are gonna do what they're gonna do. And
Yep.
so you just gotta be a custodian sometimes.
All right, next one. With executive buy-in, how far do you think you can get with compliance-only messaging versus culture care about people messaging? From Sylvia Villega.
Depends on your company. I have never had a great deal of success in the culture / care about people messaging at work in an American company that wants to make money. Capitalism, basically. It is being very blunt and very facing that head on. And it's actually kind of painful. But if I have enough fortitude to do that, the compliance, so I kind of go in phases. And when I'm first starting out in a new place, I will focus on compliance first. And then I would say, future considerations. We could improve accessibility even more. There's no rules about this yet, but we know this from different UX studies that have been done. We could improve this even more by doing this. And what I'm doing is I'm showing that compliance isn't the end all be all. It's the starting line. And I'm saying, we're going to focus on the starting line first, and then we're going to incrementally improve as we're able. But I've never had success focusing on culture / it's about people. And in fact, I've seen other accessibility folks burn out and leave the company or become redundant because they go in too heavy on that. But how can you not care about people? Because of course, how can you not care about people? But that America is a weird place and that expects you to kind of not have too much of a caring personality while you're at work. They want you to care about business objectives at work. So that's why I always try to translate what I'm feeling or what I'm caring about or my internal motivations into things that some business MBA will understand and accept.
All right, let's keep going. This one, do you have any recommendations on how to test screen reader support? And my take, just talking to a bunch of folks, tends to be that automating that is really difficult right now. And typically the best way to do it is to have folks that actually use screen readers test your stuff.
I want to extend this a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. To Melanie's point in the chat, just do it. But like there is a gradient of proficiency with screen reader use. But I'm of the school of thought that like tabbing around and listening to what it says is a really good first way to start. It's not necessarily reflective of how most people navigate with a screen reader, but the bar is in hell. So just get your feet wet and start to like play around if you are curious about this sort of thing. Another really good resource I do want to plug is a service called Assistive Labs, which generates virtual machines in your browser tab on demand that come pre-configured with NVDA, which is a very popular desktop screen reader user. And that really lowers the bar for testing, by which I mean like most people develop on Macs. VoiceOver on Mac OS is a very small percentage of what people actually use on desktop or laptop. In addition, Assistive Labs has like a tunneling support. So basically you can do your development on the Mac, load it on a PC in a virtual window and test it out that way. I use that all the dang time. I love it.
I also like to teach how to use the rotor because, like, do you see the thing you expect to see in those different rotor lists? And that can be really enlightening to folks. Like, oh, this is why heading order matters. Here's why. And you can actually just show it. And that's just been one of the biggest show and tell tools I have is these kinds of screenshots and these kinds of experiences where this is one of the easier things to pick up. Just tab through. Does it say what you expect it to say? Open the rotor up and arrow through those lists. Do you see what you think you should see there? And it really just can go miles to getting people started, to getting the concept introduced. When my son was little, his pediatrician, I was stressing because he was a picky eater and I was a first time mom and all that. And his pediatrician said, kids need to try food 15 or 16 times before they get used to the flavor. Actually, humans, this is humans. And designers and developers need to hear an idea 15 or 16 times to get used to the idea. And if you can find a good way to kind of bring that idea to them 15 or 16 times, or whatever the actual number is, but don't feel disheartened because on the first try they didn't listen. You're going to have to say it time and time again because our brains are kind of stubborn that way. And that's just how human brains work.
Yes.
So,
Yes. All right. We just answered kind of a couple. Oh, Eric, go ahead.
No
You
notes.
look like you were going to say something.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. We've got a few more, but I think I kind of want to back up to, there's a few folks asking, like, just in general, like, if you're new to web design or web development or any of that, how do you get started learning about accessibility? And if there's a couple resources we could throw their way, that would be awesome. I personally like, my favorite is Accessibility Project, because that checklist just has like really concise, like, this is what it is and this is what you need to do pretty much for most of the things there. And that's a really good starting spot for me, I think.
Yeah, I can speak to that as the former maintainer. The Accessibility Project like is a open source resource for learning about digital accessibility, and the checklist that Michael mentioned, the goal there was to kind of demystify a lot of like web content accessibility guidelines rules. And the reason for that is like the WCAG is great. It's my Bible, but it is dense. It is very dense to read. And so we tried to like flip it and make it a lot more like human friendly and break it down by category. I don't personally super like checklist based practices, but in terms of like trying to figure out where to get going, like the goal there was to like just help you orient a little bit.
Yeah, I would just say like I don't care about the checklist being a checklist. It's just more like that's a really great organization of information right there. Do you want to keep going? Okay, the top one I think is a fun one to maybe close on, but like any thoughts about users with disabilities who need to disable JavaScript in order to use assistive technologies and relying on progressive enhancement, et cetera?
Mhm. That surprises me. I've never had to, I acknowledge that there are perhaps assistive technologies out there that would require disabling JavaScript in order to use them. However, I have not experienced those yet. So please tell us more. Um,
Yeah,
I
to me that
think if
feels.
you're
Oh, go ahead.
trying to use a web application, you do need JavaScript enabled, especially as things change on the page, and we need maybe an ARIA label or an ARIA description needs to get updated accordingly. You're going to need some JavaScript, some interactivity to do that. You're going to need interactivity for forms. You're going to need interactivity to access bank accounts. There's a lot of stuff like that. I am not sure how to answer the question, only because I don't know how you would implement interactivity of any kind, uh, or implement an app that required interactivity of any kind without having the ability to use that interactivity. So,
Yeah.
yeah, curious to hear more.
So there's a very old like one of the big picture issues with the field of like digital accessibility with regards to access for disabled individuals. There are a lot of myths, and that is like I think one of the older myths that basically like JavaScript is incompatible with assistive technology. That could potentially be what we're speaking of. One thing we do have to field at GitHub sometimes is people coming at JavaScript through the lens of either privacy or progressive enhancement or both. And sometimes that'll get folded into accessibility feedback. And like that's a very kind of awkward dance we have to do. Whereas like you can have a disabled individual who cares about privacy and disables JavaScript to better cloak their presence online. That is not indicative of the majority experience. And to others' points, like there's a lot of kind of, as somebody that doesn't really like JavaScript, there is a lot of stuff you got to do in JavaScript to make experiences accessible. For progressive enhancement, I love progressive enhancement. I try to do it personally. I think there's a lot of value in thinking about it in terms of interop. I think unless you work for a government service or a very niche industry, it's going to be very hard to convince people to build that way. And so, like, unfortunately, one of the things you got to kind of do as a person that cares about the web and cares about accessibility is like play in the playground that you're given. Um, and like, would I like GitHub to work better on like slower connections and less powerful devices and, less than ideal circumstances? Yes. Do I also have to acknowledge the reality that we build on React now and we don't really prioritize that? Like, also, yes. So, like, as an individual, I can advocate. As a employee, my job is to make sure it's accessible, not necessarily to tilt at a windmill for progressive enhancement, unfortunately.
All right, I'm going to stop us right there because I know we're over time already, and some of us have hard stops. So with that, thanks for asking the questions. I really appreciate it. I know we didn't get to all of them. I might actually stick around a little bit to try to at least get responses to all of them. But that's the end of the what the webinar as far as time goes. Thank you, Eric and Melanie and Varun. Like I've been looking forward to this for so long. I think it's so cool. And I'm glad we finally got to talk shop a little bit about accessibility. So that's cool. Yeah,
Okay.
really, thank
Thank
you,
you all
everyone.
for joining. Just wanted to say we will send out a recording in the next day or two. So in case you want to share that with other folks who couldn't attend. Thanks a lot for joining me again.